The blast wasn't loud. That's the weird part. You'd think an oxygen tank exploding in the vacuum of space would be, I don't know, cinematic. But instead, it felt like the ship exhaled too hard and cracked its own ribs. I was brushing crumbs, yep, literal crumbs, off the control panel. Can't have floating cheese crackers drifting into the equipment. Then thud, a jolt, a vibration, not sharp but deep, like the hum of something ancient shifting. Then the lights flickered. I glanced over at Jack. He blinked, swivel-eyed over to Lovell. We all paused, and in that second, before anyone said anything, we knew. This wasn't a fuse. This wasn't turbulence. This was bad. Real bad. Seconds later, alarms. Red angry, unrelenting. O2 pressure dropping faster than my faith in NASA's quality control. I reached for the headset. Houston, we've had a problem here. Classic understatement, right? But what else do you say when your spaceship is bleeding air into the void and your lunar dreams just popped like a cheap balloon? You might have heard that line 1,000 times, Houston. We have a problem. But it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't dramatic. It was just stunned honesty. Like reporting a flat tire while your car's on fire. Anyway, let's rewind a second. This wasn't day one of the mission. We were over 200,000 miles from Earth, coasting toward the moon, running routine checks. I'd just taken a drink from my pouch orange Tang, the beverage of astronauts and masochists. We were joking about which Beatles song to play next when boom, the universe smacked us in the teeth. The oxygen tank number 2, if you want to get specific, had ruptured. The force tore through the service module like a battering ram, knocking out both oxygen and power to the command module. Translation: no juice, no air, and no plan. You know what's ironic? This was supposed to be a routine mission. NASA had already landed 2 crews on the moon. Apollo 13 was like the middle child, flight low expectations, no press attention, just there to do the job. Except fate or Murphy's Law, or maybe the moon gods decided we needed a little spice. And here we were, suddenly violently off script. Lovell, our commander, was the calmest of us. The guy could probably land a plane in a hurricane while balancing a coffee cup. He took one look at the gauges, nodded, and said, "We're not going to the moon." Not angry, not panicked, just reality. And in that moment, I swear I felt every dream I'd ever had about moonwalking, about holding that flag, about looking back at Earth and thinking I made it, all of it just evaporated, like the oxygen hissing out of our tanks. One historical fact for you: that tank had a faulty thermostat. It was rated for 28 volts, but ground tests had exposed it to 65 volts during pre-launch. Historians still debate whether the engineers overlooked that or just assumed it'd be fine. It'll hold, they probably thought, famous last words. So, now what? We had hours, maybe less, before the command module became an unlivable freezer. And the lunar module, that tiny flimsy thing built to support 2 men for a couple of days. That was now our lifeboat, for 3 men, for 4 days, across 200,000 miles of deep space. No pressure. I crawled through the tunnel into the lunar module. It smelled like plastic and Velcro and a hint of fear sweat. The LM wasn't designed for comfort. It was like camping in a broom closet with no heater, no toilet, and no margin for error. But it had what we needed: batteries, oxygen tanks, and a few glimmers of hope. Still, I remember thinking, this is not how I imagined being an astronaut. You train for years to do science, to explore, to be a hero in a shiny white suit bouncing on lunar dust. But suddenly, it's about survival. Your job becomes fixing broken circuits with whatever's lying around. I saw Lovell duct taping a checklist to the wall. Jack was writing fuel calculations on the side of his leg. Me, I was shaking so hard, I kept missing the Velcro strip to hold down a pencil. We didn't even have enough water. Our daily ration got slashed to about 6 ounces. That's one gulp, folks. One. Try brushing your teeth with that. I started fantasizing about lemonade ice cubes, a root beer float. Instead, I got a warm bag of Tang and a warning not to overexert myself because I might sweat and we couldn't afford to lose moisture. Want an odd fact? Our urine bags started freezing midstream. That's how cold it was getting. The spacecraft temp dropped into the 30s. We could see our breath. Our hands turned purple. The condensation on the walls started to crystallize. Everything felt brittle, including our nerves. At one point, Jack muttered, "It's like we're in a flying refrigerator." I joked, "Yeah." And somebody left the door open. Lovell deadpanned. Next time we take a cruise. And we laughed. It was either that or scream, but humor kept us sane. So did discipline. You don't panic in space. Not if you want to come home. We ran checklists, powered down unnecessary systems, and began conserving every scrap of electricity like misers guarding gold. The worst part wasn't the cold. It was the knowing. Knowing that every minute our situation was decaying. That no one had ever tested this before. That the plan we were following was being written by engineers on Earth who were running simulations based on partial data and blind guesses. Back on Earth, I later found out the media had picked up our situation. Walter Cronkite was on every TV. Schools paused classes to pray. Kids sent handwritten notes to NASA. Please save the astronauts. I didn't know any of that then. All I knew was that the stars outside looked beautiful and cruel, unreachable, unconcerned. And I started thinking, if we die out here, there's no burial, no tombstone, just a metal capsule drifting forever through space. Maybe aliens find it someday and wonder why we were carrying duct tape, freeze-dried beef, and a Bible. But then Lovell said something that snapped me out of it. We're not dead yet. Let's keep it that way. And just like that, we went back to work. The lunar module wasn't designed to be a lifeboat, but that's exactly what we needed it to become, and fast. As soon as we got the essentials powered up, we realized we were on borrowed time. Oxygen levels were manageable for now. But CO2? That was the ticking time bomb. Here's something they don't show in the movies. Dying from carbon dioxide poisoning doesn't look very heroic. You just get sleepy then, confused, then gone. We were 3 engineers trapped in a glorified beer can, slowly suffocating in our own exhalation. And the worst part? The scrubbers that filter CO2. The ones in the lunar module weren't enough for 3 people for 4 days. The command module had extra ones, but the canisters were square. The LM's ports were round. Yeah, you've probably heard the phrase, "We had to fit a square peg into a round hole." That wasn't a metaphor for us. It was Thursday, so we called Houston. They called in a team of engineers, handed them the parts we had on board, a plastic bag, cardboard, duct tape, and socks, and said, "Build something that'll keep them breathing." I don't know what I expected, but what we got looked like an arts and crafts project made by someone's weird uncle. But it worked. We wrapped plastic tubing around the command module's scrubber, shoved it into the LM port, taped it shut, and prayed. It held. The CO2 levels started to drop. And for the first time in about 12 hours, I took a real breath. Not the shallow, panicked kind, but one that actually felt human. Here's your historical fact. The actual contraption NASA devised that day is still taught in engineering schools as a perfect example of emergency ingenuity under pressure. It even has a name, the mailbox, because that's what it looked like, a lopsided mailbox full of hope. But let's rewind a moment. Before the mailbox miracle, we had to figure out everything. Power levels, food rations, heat conservation. And none of it was designed for this scenario. The lunar module was built for 2 men for 2 days. We were now 3 men in it for 4. That's like stretching a 2-seater Mini Cooper into an Airbnb. You want an odd fact. We started sleeping in shifts, but we were so cold that our breath frosted over our sleeping bags. Imagine trying to rest while wearing all your clothes floating in zero gravity with frost forming on your face. At one point, I swear I dreamed I was a burrito being stored in a freezer aisle. Food became another issue. We had plenty of it in theory, but most of it required water to rehydrate, and we were already rationing our 6 ounces per day. Try eating beef stew when it feels like you're chewing on a desiccated dog treat. Jack said, "I think I chipped a tooth on that peach cobbler." Lovell grunted. "Be thankful." I got pineapple surprise. "Surprise?" I asked. "Yeah. The surprise is it tastes like cardboard." We laughed. But inside we were all thinking the same thing. How long could we keep this up? Every time we powered down more systems to conserve the batteries, the lunar module got a little darker, a little colder. We stuck Velcro on the walls to keep the checklists in place, scribbled notes with shaking hands, and monitored the levels obsessively. Any spike in CO2 meant something was failing again. At one point, I thought I was hallucinating. There was a reflection in the LM window, and for a moment I thought I saw Earth blink. Just a trick of the light, probably. Or maybe my brain trying to make something familiar out of a situation that felt increasingly alien. Back in Houston, they were working overtime. Entire teams rotating in shifts, sleeping on floors, eating out of vending machines, trying to simulate our conditions down to the last decimal. You think we were the heroes. Those guys on the ground were miracle workers with chalkboards and coffee breath. Historians still debate whether the Apollo 13 crew could have made it back without the ingenuity of those engineers. Personally, I don't think we had a shot without them. We were the hands. They were the brains. We had courage. They had calculators. But even with their help, we had to stay mentally sharp, which got harder by the hour. The combination of low temperatures, lack of sleep, and carbon dioxide made our heads feel foggy. Conversations became slower. Our reactions delayed. I remember trying to write down a number and forgetting what it meant halfway through the line. Lovell kept us focused. His voice didn't rise. His tone didn't crack. Even when we were taping plastic bags together to prevent our own asphyxiation, he treated it like fixing a leaky pipe at home. I once asked him how he stayed so calm. He said, "I've got no time for panic. If I do my job right, we go home. If I mess it up, we don't. That's all. Simple." But it kept us alive. We even started naming parts of the LM like castaways, assigning names to coconuts. One corner of the module became the office where we kept tools. A panel near the hatch was the pantry. My sleeping bag corner, the cave. It sounds silly, but assigning names to things gave us a sense of control. Like the spacecraft was a house we were temporarily renting. A really, really broken house with no landlord to complain to. At one point, I asked Jack, "You think anyone's gonna believe this when we get back?" He looked around at the frost-covered controls, the taped-together CO2 filter, and said, "Only if we bring back photos." Spoiler alert, we did. Still, every hour felt like another test. The levels would spike. The power would flicker. The temperature would dip just a little more. And through it all, we kept one eye on the gauges and the other on the growing question mark that was our trajectory home. We weren't just fighting the ship, we were racing the clock. By day 3, the cold had crept into everything. It was the kind of cold that gets under your skin and lives in your bones. The metal walls of the lunar module were sweating ice. Our fingers were stiff, our cheeks numb, and every movement felt like swimming through molasses in a walk-in freezer. We'd powered down nearly everything. No lights, no heaters, barely enough electricity to keep the guidance system warm. The silence was only broken by the occasional mechanical sigh of life support or the soft clink of frost forming. And our voices, quieter now, softer, like we didn't want to disturb the spacecraft or jinx whatever fragile system was still working. There was one moment I remember crystal clear. I looked over at Lovell, who had his arms wrapped tight around himself, eyes half shut, lips dry and cracked. He caught me staring and gave me a weak smile. "Cozy, huh?" "5 stars," I said. "Would freeze again," Jack muttered from his corner. "Anyone else hearing phantom ice cream trucks? Or is that just me?" We laughed. Barely. Our voices were dry and brittle. That's the thing they don't prepare you for in astronaut training. The loneliness. You can learn to pilot a spacecraft, do a lunar EVA, even fix a thruster mid-orbit, but no one teaches you how to be cold and still. Just still. Floating cramped, freezing, and trying not to think about home. My toes went numb first, then my fingertips. Writing anything took triple the time and my pen kept slipping. Our breath fogged over every surface. We rotated sleeping shifts just to keep circulation going. Even our food, already miserable, was icy and tasteless. Odd fact, our pee bags began freezing before we could even seal them. That's not a sentence I ever thought I'd say aloud, but there it is. Space isn't glamorous. It's creative misery with a view. And what a view it was. Out the window, space stretched infinitely in every direction. No sound, no color. Just the black ink of the universe, punctuated by indifferent stars. Sometimes I'd stare at Earth, just a tiny blue marble trailing behind us, and I'd feel like a ghost, watching the world I used to be part of. One morning, or what passed for morning in space, I caught a glint of the moon from the LM porthole. So close. It felt like an insult. We were supposed to be there. We trained for it. I had practiced the exact steps, how to walk on the surface, what samples to collect, even what joke I'd tell on the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for my resume. But now, the moon was just scenery, a missed connection, a silent witness to our rerouted destiny. "Still want to go back someday?" I asked Lovell. He didn't look up, just nodded. "Yeah. But I'd like to get back first." You'd think all this discomfort, the cold, the thirst, the lack of sleep would lead to tempers flaring. But somehow we got closer, tighter, like brothers in an unspoken pact. We shared what we had, split snacks past the one working pen like a sacred relic, and took turns cheering each other up. I told stories about my dad's awful meatloaf. Jack recited movie quotes in a James Stewart impression. Lovell even sang a few off-key verses from Moon River, which I must admit hit differently when you're drifting in literal moonlight. Historically, the Apollo 13 mission marked the first time NASA had to manage an emergency this severe in space. They created entirely new communication protocols on the fly. Backup data lines, redundant commands. There's even a plaque at Mission Control commemorating the exact moment they realized we weren't going to the moon, but we were going to survive. Historians still debate whether it was leadership luck or pure collective stubbornness that saved us. Personally, I think it was all three. Plus duct tape. Lots and lots of duct tape. At one point, we tried to warm up by layering every bit of spare clothing we had. Jack looked like a walking laundry basket. "If I die," he said, "tell my wife I wore all the socks." There was no more shaving, no more washing, no toothbrushes. We smelled like cold sweat, space grime, and regret. The LM walls were sticky with humidity. The air tasted like recycled breath, and yet, oddly, there was peace in it. A kind of resigned focus. I spent hours staring at gauges, making mental calculations, writing checklists we'd probably never need. It was meditative, like monks reciting prayers on a mountain, except our mountain was hurtling through space, and our prayers were written in pencil on laminated paper. We knew Earth was listening. We had limited communication windows, but when we did get through, the voices from Houston were calm, clear, and constant. They never said, "We don't know." They always said, "We'll figure it out." That meant everything. I remember one of the Capcom guys, his voice cracking just slightly, saying, "You guys are doing great up there." Lovell replied, "We're still breathing. That's a win." Another odd moment. When we passed behind the moon, we lost contact completely. Total blackout. For several minutes, it was just us. 3 humans on the far side of the moon, completely alone, 238,000 miles from everyone else. No signal. No backup. Just the stars and our own heartbeat. And you know what? It was beautiful. Terrifying, yes. But there was something sacred about that silence. Like being inside a cathedral built by time and void. When we re-established contact with Earth, I felt relieved, sure. But a tiny part of me missed the stillness. The way the universe seemed to listen without judgment. Eventually, the cold stopped getting worse. Not because it got better, just because our bodies gave up complaining. We adapted. We moved slower, spoke less, and preserved energy however we could. But deep down, we all knew this was just the beginning. The easy part was staying alive. The hard part was getting home. And home felt very, very far away. We were drifting blind through space. And the worst part, that wasn't a metaphor. After the explosion, with power crippled, and the navigation system mostly offline, we had no reliable way to know exactly where we were going. Imagine driving a car with a busted GPS fogged-up windshield and a broken speedometer, except the car is 250,000 miles from Earth, and you're running out of gas. Normally, we'd rely on the guidance system to plot our course and make tiny corrections. But that system lived in the command module, and the command module, at this point, was more or less a frozen tomb. So we had to go full caveman with a spaceship. I'm talking window-based navigation, stopwatch timing, and pencil-on-paper calculations like it was 1962 math class all over again. The plan: use the moon's gravity to slingshot us back toward Earth. But if we were even slightly off, we could miss Earth entirely or hit the atmosphere at the wrong angle and bounce off into deep space like a cosmic skipping stone. Not ideal. That's when the real fun started: the manual burn. To steer our frozen tin can back on course, we had to fire the LM's descent engine at just the right moment for just the right duration in just the right direction. No computers. No auto-align. Just Lovell, staring out the window using the tiny crescent of Earth as our visual anchor, while Jack and I timed the burn with a digital stopwatch. And when I say digital, I mean it had actual buttons you had to press manually. Revolutionary stuff. Historical fact: this eyeball navigation method wasn't invented on the spot. NASA had tested it in theory, but it had never been tried in a real emergency. Until now, we lined up the spacecraft manually. That involved using the LM's thrusters to rotate us until the Earth appeared in the right spot in the right window. The procedure was so delicate I was breathing like I was trying to avoid fogging up the glass. Any twitch, any overcorrection, and we'd veer off into the cosmic void. "Ready," Lovell said. I held the stopwatch. Jack braced against the wall with his pencil. Lovell stared out the window, gripping the controls. 3, 2, burn. The LM engine ignited with a low rumble. The kind of sound that feels more like a vibration in your spine than something in your ears. The whole spacecraft shuddered. Hold it steady. I counted off the seconds, sweat dripping from my forehead despite the cold. The engine's push was just enough to tilt our direction, and we had to manually shut it off at exactly the right moment. 10, 9, 8. Jack called out corrections. A little more pitch. Little more. Okay? Stop. 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 2, 1. Cut off. Lovell killed the engine. Silence slammed back into the module like a door closing. We floated suspended in the aftermath. I exhaled. Did it work? Lovell looked out the window. We're about to find out. You know that feeling when you throw a paper airplane and it almost crashes but somehow glides perfectly. That's what we were doing with our lives. And guess what? It worked. The burn corrected our path just enough to bring us around the moon and slingshot us homeward. We actually saw the moon swing by below us, white and glowing, riddled with scars, silent and indifferent. You still want to walk on it? I asked Lovell. He didn't answer. We passed into the moon's shadow again, radio silence. That quiet was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, unsettling, like the moment before a verdict is read. When the signal came back, Houston confirmed the trajectory looked good. Not great, but good enough, which frankly was all we needed. And yet the doubt lingered, because this whole thing had become a game of margins. Every maneuver had to be precise. Every gram of fuel, every second of thrust, every angle of burn mattered. We were balancing a house of cards while floating through a hurricane. Odd fact. At one point, during one of our attitude adjustments, I sneezed and accidentally tapped the side panel. Just a tap, but the whole alignment skewed off by a fraction of a degree. Lovell glared at me like I'd kicked his dog. I spent the next hour quietly rechecking every number I'd written. With gloves on, you'd think we were stressed. And yeah, we were. But there was also this strange rhythm we fell into. Like a jazz trio, each of us playing our part in sync. One guy on the controls, one calling out numbers, one keeping time. No yelling, no drama. Just cold, precise cooperation. Historians still debate whether this part of the mission, the manual burn, was the most dangerous. Some say re-entry was worse. Others say the CO2 scare. Me. I think this was the moment we proved we were more than just passengers. We were pilots. We were crew. Because even though we couldn't see where we were going, not really, we trusted each other. And we trusted that if we could just keep Earth in the window, we'd find our way home. There was one particular moment after the burn, after the silence, after we'd rechecked our new heading for the 50th time, I looked out that window and saw Earth. It was so small. You can fit the whole world in a thumbnail when you're out there. Every city, every war, every stupid argument about who forgot to replace the toilet paper roll, just a tiny dot in the void. Jack floated over beside me and said, "Hard to believe that's where all the pizza is." We laughed kind of, quietly, because it was true. You never feel more connected to humanity than when you're looking at it from 200,000 miles away. And you never feel more alone, either. But there it was, still in view, still our goal. And now we had a path back. That didn't mean it was going to be easy, but at least we were pointed in the right direction. You ever try to have a calm conversation while your ride is breaking down midair and you're 200,000 miles from the nearest gas station? That's pretty much what every call with Houston felt like after the explosion. Our voices might have been steady, but underneath it all, there was this buzzing tension, like everyone was just one wrong word away from admitting we were on the brink. The connection wasn't crystal clear. You had static, crackling little dropouts, but those engineers on the ground, they were relentless. They stayed up for days running simulations, testing procedures on the ground modules, trying to figure out how to turn a dead command module and an overloaded lunar module into a cobbled-together escape pod. Like MacGyver, but with more math and less hair gel. One of the first challenges, power. We had to literally start budgeting every watt. I mean that watt by watt. Turning on a light. That's a decision. Running the heater. Nope, sorry, that's a luxury now. Every system we powered up had to be absolutely essential. The final checklist for re-entry power was so tight, you could have powered a toaster and triggered a blackout. Odd fact. We ended up running the entire return sequence on less power than your average coffee maker. Think about that the next time you complain your iPhone's low battery mode is unusable. Our conversations with Houston became our lifeline. They'd say, "We need you to power down this system and reroute through the secondary node on the environmental control unit." And we'd say, "Can you say that in English?" But they were patient. So were we. Because everyone knew the stakes. No one panicked. No one screamed. No one said, "We're not going to make it." That's the unspoken rule in space you don't fold. And let me tell you, I've never appreciated checklists more in my life. Each one was like a prayer. If you followed it exactly, you'd live. Skip a step, flip the wrong switch, and you might accidentally vent the last of your oxygen into the void. The command module was still cold. We hadn't been in there since the explosion. It was too risky to waste power on heating it until the final hours. So, it just sat there like a ghost frost on every surface, systems asleep, wires stiff from the chill. But eventually, we knew we had to go back. That was our ride home. Jack volunteered to climb in and start checking the systems. When he returned, he looked like he'd just seen a haunted house. "It's colder than my ex-girlfriend's heart in there," he said, "and smells worse." We spent hours working through the restart plan. Every button we pressed was followed by a pause, waiting to see if a light came on, if a panel flickered, if we'd used up just a little too much power. Lovell stayed laser-focused. I swear you could have dropped a wrench on his foot, and he'd still be calculating the amperage required to cycle the fuel cells. Historians still debate whether this phase, reviving the frozen command module, was more difficult than any moon landing. The systems were never designed to be brought back online mid-flight. Some engineers called it resurrecting the dead. Others just called it Thursday. And then there was the psychological toll. The cold had never let up. The condensation had formed a film over every surface. Our hands were cracked and raw. We were exhausted. Sleep came in short, uncomfortable bursts, and when we did dream, it was usually about Earth or pizza, or warm socks. There was a quiet moment sometime during our second-to-last orbit when we just stopped talking. Not in a bad way. We just didn't have anything else to say. The ship was silent, the lights dim, and Earth was growing larger in the window. We all stared at it, like kids waiting for their parents to come pick them up from the worst field trip in history. I broke the silence. "Think they'll throw us a parade?" Jack said. "If they do, I want hot dogs," Lovell added, "and blankets." Lots of blankets. But even joking couldn't shake the nerves. The re-entry plan was brutal. Every system we needed had to be powered up at the last possible moment, in perfect sequence, or else we'd burn up, bounce off, or black out, and never wake up. At one point, I asked Houston, "Just to be clear, this will work, right?" Pause. "Well, it should work." Comforting. Then came the issue of mass. The ship was heavier than it should have been. Some gear we couldn't jettison. We needed to dump weight, so we started chucking everything that wasn't bolted down, used food packets, equipment, covers, tools we didn't need. Jack even tried to get rid of his logbook. Lovell stopped him. "If we make it, People will want to know how he said. If we don't, they'll want to know why. We kept the book. As we neared the point of no return, Houston's instructions got even tighter. Flip switch 7. Wait 3 seconds. Now switch 8. Rotate at 0.8 degrees. Don't sneeze. Okay, I made up that last one, but you get the point. It was delicate, intense, and we were so tired. But that's when the adrenaline kicked in. We weren't scared anymore, we were ready. We'd survived an explosion, freezing temperatures, dehydration, starvation, carbon dioxide poisoning, and existential dread. What was one more little thing, like fiery atmospheric re-entry? We looked at each other. We were pale, cracked-lipped eyes hollow, but there was fire in our guts again. The kind of fire that says, we are not going to let this ship be our coffin. One final burn. One final checklist. One final chance to make it home. This was it. The last maneuver. The one we couldn't mess up. We called it the burn that had to be perfect, and not because we liked dramatic names, because if we got the timing wrong by even a second, we were either going to skip off Earth's atmosphere like a flat stone across a lake, or dive in too steep and disintegrate into a million pieces. Neither sounded like a cozy ending. Now, normally the onboard computer would handle this sort of thing. But remember, our guidance systems were toast. The command module had just been rebooted like an old desktop from the 80s, and the lunar module was about to be jettisoned like yesterday's garbage. So, this critical maneuver, it was up to us, manual burn. No digital countdowns, no auto-thrust alignments. Just 3 guys, 1 stopwatch, 1 pencil. An Earth framed in the corner of a tiny window. I wish I were kidding. We reviewed the procedure so many times I could recite it in my sleep. Rotate the LM. Lock visual on Earth's limb. Burn the engine for exactly 14 seconds. Not 13, not 15, 14. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, except with the fate of your entire body on the line. Level. Our human gyroscope took position at the controls. Jack held the stopwatch. I handled the attitude thrusters, watching for any yaw or pitch misalignment. We went silent. Ready, Level, said I, steady. On your mark, Jack whispered, thumb hovering over the button. 3, 2, burn. The engine roared, not a violent roar, more like a trembling pulse through the floor. The LM shuddered, the stars outside shifted, and the whole craft felt like it was holding its breath. 6, 7, 8. I was adjusting the pitch with tiny puffs from the thrusters, nudging the nose down by fractions of a degree. My fingers were shaking. Not from fear. Okay, maybe a little, but mostly from the cold. 13, 14, cut off. The burn ended. Just like that. The noise stopped. The ship drifted back into its eerie, frozen stillness. Trajectory, Level asked. Jack glanced at the instruments. We're close, within margin. Margin. That word became sacred. It meant we had a shot. The lunar module had done its job. It saved our lives. Gave us oxygen. Power. Warmth, sort of. Now, we had to let it go. I'll admit I got a little attached to that weird, ugly little spider. Saying goodbye to it felt personal. Like parting ways with a life raft that had just dragged you through a hurricane. We sealed the hatch, undocked, watched it drift away. There it was, slowly spinning in the void alone. It had been our home for 4 days. Our sanctuary. Our bathroom, even. Now, it was a piece of space junk doomed to burn in the atmosphere. Level murmured, "Goodbye, Aquarius. You did good." And then it was just us and the command module. The old girl had been frozen solid for days. Systems groggy, controls crusted with condensation. But she was waking up, blinking back to life, like a bear coming out of hibernation. We strapped in. No music, no jokes. Just the hum of systems, charging the click of belts, the steady beep of heart monitors. Odd fact. The only luxury we had during re-entry was our biosensors. NASA could literally watch our heart rates in real time. I often wondered if anyone back at mission control made bets. Bet you Lovell's pulse doesn't go above 90. $20, says Jack starts hyperventilating. Spoiler, none of us freaked out. Not outwardly, anyway. Then came the re-entry checklist. The last list we'd ever read aloud in space. Main bus voltage, nominal. Pitch alignment, locked. Parachute system armed, armed. You ever wait for a roller coaster drop, multiply that by 10,000? That's what re-entry felt like. Except your coaster's on fire, your tracks are melting, and there's a good chance you explode before the souvenir photo. We hit the upper atmosphere. Silence. Then the flames began. The command. Module's heat shield slammed into Earth's atmosphere like a brick hitting a furnace. Outside, the temperature reached 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. We were surrounded by plasma wrapped in a cocoon of fire and friction. Inside it sounded like a freight train crashing into a volcano. The capsule shook violently. Everything rattled. My teeth, my fingers, my thoughts. I gripped the straps so hard, my knuckles turned bone white. I wasn't praying, not really. But I might have whispered a few apologies to every ex-girlfriend I'd ever ghosted. And then blackout. Radio, silence. Standard for re-entry, but still terrifying. There's this window around 4 minutes where the plasma surrounding the capsule blocks all communication. No signal gets through. No confirmation that you're alive. Just nothing. Mission control stared at their screens, holding their breath. Families back home gripped each other's hands. And inside the capsule, we waited. I listened for sounds, any sounds that might mean something was wrong. A crack, a hiss, a pop. Nothing. The minutes stretched like hours, Jack whispered. This the part where we turn into toast. Nope, I said, eyes closed. This is the part where we take a nap and trust the parachutes. And then, Odyssey. This is Houston. Do you copy? The sweetest words I've ever heard in my entire life. Lovell grabbed the mic. Affirmative. Houston, we're here. The parachutes deployed with a violent jolt. First the drogues, then the mains. I saw them out the window, massive red and white canopies billowing above us like angels made of nylon. Splashdown. It was a thud. Not gentle. Not cinematic. Just a wet smack into the Pacific. Salt water sprayed. My helmet bumped the side panel. I looked at Jack. He looked at me. We were both smiling like lunatics. The hatch opened. Sunlight hit my face for the first time in 6 days. Warm, golden, blinding. And I thought we made it. Not to the moon. Not to glory. But back. The helicopter thumped in the sky above us, sending ripples across the ocean like applause from the heavens. We bobbed in the Pacific, dazed, half-frozen, soaking wet, and still processing the fact that we were alive. The recovery divers were the first humans we'd seen in days, and they looked like angels in wetsuits. One gave me a thumbs up through the window. I gave him one back, but it probably looked like I was trying to unscrew my own thumb. I could barely feel my hands. They pulled us out, one at a time, hoisted by cables into the helicopter, our legs dangling like exhausted puppets. The air inside the chopper was warm and smelled like oil and life. I sat there, suit-dripping limbs, trembling, just blinking at the medic across from me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm not dead," I croaked. "So I guess that's a yes." We landed on the USS Iwo Jima, and as I stepped onto the deck, there was this strange pause, like I expected the Earth to feel. Different. But gravity was still gravity. The sky was still blue. The world kept spinning, unaware that three guys had just pulled off the most improbable space comeback in history. Now you'd think we'd be rushed into hugs and press cameras and steak dinners. Nope. First, we got quarantined. NASA wasn't taking any chances with moon germs, even though we hadn't set foot on the moon. So, into the mobile quarantine facility, we went a glorified Airstream trailer with sealed doors and a view of absolutely nothing. Odd fact, President Nixon came to visit us through the window. He waved, gave a little speech, congratulated us for surviving. I waved back. All very touching for a chat between a soaking wet astronaut and a guy behind glass. Inside that quarantine trailer, we decompressed, not just physically, but mentally. We replayed everything. The blast, the freeze, the burns, the jokes, the near misses, the silence, and somewhere in the middle of it all, it hit me. We were never supposed to make it home. Not really. Statistically, there were too many things that should have gone wrong. We should have suffocated, or frozen, or missed Earth entirely, or burned up on re-entry. But we didn't. We beat the odds. Because of training, because of teamwork, because of duct tape and stubbornness and a whole planet rooting for us. Historians still debate what Apollo 13 truly meant. Was it a failure because we didn't land on the moon? Or a success because we brought everyone home? Some say it was NASA's finest hour. Others say it exposed how close we came to catastrophe. For me, it was both. A failure of systems, a triumph of humanity. We went up as astronauts came back as survivors. There was a press conference not long after quarantine. The room was packed. Cameras, reporters, questions flying like popcorn. Were you afraid? What was it like during re-entry? Did you think you were going to die? I looked out at that sea of microphones and blinking lights and tried to come up with something profound. All I could say was I really missed cheeseburgers. Everyone laughed. And honestly, that was the truth. I missed Earth. The food, the air, the smells, the random chaos, even traffic. A lot changed after Apollo 13. NASA redesigned systems, procedures, training. They added backup to the backup of the backup. Future missions had redundancies for their redundancies. And all of that came from us, not our success, but our survival. Aquarius, the lunar module that saved us, burned up in the atmosphere. Odyssey, our command module, was eventually displayed in museums. You can go see it, stare at the scorch marks, the cracked switches, the charred heat shield. You can almost smell the desperation baked into its walls. I went back to regular life. Sort of. People treated us like heroes, but I never really felt like one. I felt grateful, lucky, changed. You can't ride a rocket into the jaws of death and come back without leaving a piece of yourself out there. Sometimes I dream I'm still in the capsule, cold, floating, waiting. I hear the crackle of the radio, the hiss of the oxygen flow, the distant voice from Houston calling out my name. I wake up and stare at the ceiling, and for a second I swear I can still see the stars. But then I remember I'm home, and that's enough. So, that's the story. 3 men, 1 busted spacecraft, 200,000 miles from home, and somehow against everything, we made it back. There were no medals that could truly capture what happened. No headline that could contain the tension, the grit, the absurdity. This wasn't just a space mission. It was a survival epic, written in checklists and cold sweat. People like to romanticize space. Talk about rockets and glory and flags on distant soil. But space is indifferent. It doesn't care how brave you are. It doesn't care how carefully you've trained. It just is vast, silent, and merciless. What brought us back wasn't luck or fate or even brilliance alone. It was ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It was ground control engineers with coffee stains and tired eyes. It was duct tape and cardboard. It was friendship in the frost. It was jokes in the dark. It was three guys floating in a metal box, refusing to quit. And that's why Apollo 13 matters. Not because of where we went, but because of what we came through. So the next time life hurls a fireball at your plans, just remember this, even in the blackness of space, even with everything broken. Even when the odds say no, there's still a way back. Just keep Earth in the window and don't stop counting. Thank you for listening.